Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the University-Rosedale Riding Federal Election Candidates Debate. Ladies and gentlemen from the audience and candidates, thank you very much for participating this evening. I know it's been short notice, but it seems like the whole election's been short notice. So, my name's Michael Roger. I'll be the moderator for the debate this evening with my co-moderator.
Sure. Oh, John Caliendo with ABC Residents Association. Good evening.
Historically, the North Rosedale Residents Association has been organizing these political debates at both the provincial, federal, and municipal levels for over the last 20 years. So you may recall, actually, two of the people on the line here today, that on October the 2nd, 2019, we were gathered at Rosedale United Church for the last debate. So thank you very much for joining. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. This event's hosted by 7 of the contiguous University-Rosedale riding associations. And each of the presidents has been participating in the planning process over the last couple of months. There's a subset, there's only 4 candidates participating today. This is not an all candidates debate, but a candidates debate. And the subtlety is important, which I'll get into in a minute. The resident associations hosting this event include the North Rosedale Residents Association. Co-presidents are Kathy Falcone and Alex Jenkins. South Rosedale Residents Association President Don Hogarth. The Moore Park Residents Association President is Gordon Bogdan. The Governor's Bridge Residents Association President Chris Fraser. Summerhill Residents Association President is Deborah Briggs. The Greater Yorkville Residents Association, the president is Alan Baker, and the ABC Residents is John Caliendo. Okay. So we've got administering the event today is our technical support person, Guillermo, who's off to our left. He'll be keeping time for everybody, and that'll be on the screen. We'll get into that in just a moment, and we'll also be posting the questions in the chat. Reverend Dr. Kristen Phillipson of Rosedale United Church is out in Edmonton, and she'll be inputting those so everybody can see them. Now, we advertise this debate to run between 7 and 9. We'll be finished on time, but we've had a lot of people say, I'm not sure my attention span will last until 9 o'clock. Is there any way we could wrap up at 8:30? So in the interest of audience participation and maybe everybody wanting to eat dinner, we'll try and wrap things up a little bit early if that's possible. Over the last few weeks, the questions have been developed by the Resident Association presidents with input from area residents. We've got a number of prepared questions. For the most part, the candidates have seen all of them. There weren't a lot of new additions. If we have an opportunity to, we will have the chat open, and we will take questions from the chat room. Just so you're aware, we really request that there's no kind of harassing or kind of abusive language or anything in the chat. If there is, we'll be shutting that down. So if you want to ask a question, ask it through Zoom, and I keep it, rather succinct. Less is more is what I would suggest. And if you want to direct it to a particular candidate, that's great. Otherwise, ask it to the group. The candidates participating in the debate this evening include Tim Grant with the Green Party. You may want to wave just so we know who you are. Chrystia Freeland with the Liberal Party. Stephen Taylor from the Conservative Party. And Nicole Robichaux from the NDP. What we've done is the presidents have selected a speaking sequence, just randomly picked some numbers, and we'll be getting into kind of the order of speaking. We'll start with a 2-minute introduction from each of the candidates. The debate format tonight will be that we'll be doing a quick introduction, just reading the bios from the websites for each of the candidates. We'll also be reading, providing details on the other 2 candidates that aren't here from the People's Party of Canada and the Communist Party. There was the presidents of the resident associations made a decision, just we needed some criteria for determining who was going to be participating. And the decision was that it would be parties that had members in the House of Commons. So it wasn't, we don't mean to exclude anybody overtly. It just happens that we had to have a cutoff somewhere. And that was the determining factor. But we always review the criteria prior to the next debate, and we'll certainly do that before we have the next debate to ensure that we've got all the most popular parties participating. The speaking process will be that each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Questions directed to the candidate, that individual will have 90 seconds to respond, and the other candidates will have 60 seconds to rebut. If the question is not directed to any specific candidate, then each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to John to just give a quick bio review of each of the candidates. John?
Thank you, Michael. The bios are from your respective websites, so we've edited them in order to remove any suggestion that we were endorsing any one candidate. In random order, we begin with Tim Grant. Tim grew up in Moore Park and has lived in the Harbour Village for over 35 years. Tim is publisher of Green Teacher, an environmental education magazine. He has edited 10 books and hosted 85 webinars on a wide variety of education topics. He was the chair of Harbour Village Residents Association for 7 years and a board member for 14. During that time, he co-chaired Tower Power Toronto, which enabled those in condos, co-ops, and apartment buildings to green their buildings. Tim has been the Green candidate in the last 3 provincial elections and continues to serve as a provincial party's transport critic. He is a federal party's urban affairs and housing critic. Welcome, Tim. Chrystia Freeland is a Liberal Party. The Honourable Chrystia Freeland is Canada's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Ms. Freeland was first elected as a Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre in 2013. 2015, Ms. Freeland served as Minister of International Trade. From January of 2017 to November 2019, she served as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And in November 2019, Ms. Freeland was appointed Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. She was appointed Minister of Finance in August of 2020. Ms. Freeland was born in Peace River, Alberta, educated at Harvard before continuing her studies on a Rhodes Scholarship at the University of Oxford. Ms. Freeland lives in our neighborhood with her husband and 3 children. Steve Taylor of the Conservative Party. Steve is a proud Toronto resident and a Stephen Taylor, a Toronto resident and business lawyer specializing in privacy law and data protection, advising Canadian and international corporations, governments, and non-governmental organizations while working in Toronto, London, and Singapore. Stephen was a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa and taught law at the University of London. Stephen received an LLM from London School of Economics, an LLB from the University of London, and a BA from Concordia University in Montreal. I'm Nicole Robichaux of the NDP. Nicole is a humanitarian worker who has assisted individuals fleeing from crises around the world. Nicole has supported the response to outbreaks of cholera in Sierra Leone and Ebola in West Africa, and she helped the humanitarian mission in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. Throughout the pandemic, Nicole has worked with vulnerable individuals around the world to ensure they get the support they needed to stay healthy. A queer and non-binary activist, Nicole has worked to help build a future where racism, discrimination, homophobia, and transphobia have no place in Canada. Born in Vancouver and raised by a single mom in Nova Scotia, she now lives and calls Toronto home. Nicole has a bachelor in journalism from Ryerson and a master's in media studies from Concordia. We also are going to mention the 2 candidates who are not present this evening. David Kent, who is the People's Party of Canada president. David was born in and has lived an entire life as a resident of University-Rosedale. His great-grandfather founded the Canadian National Exhibition and was involved in the founding of Rosedale United Church. 5 generations of his family have since lived in Rosedale. He has enjoyed a long, successful career as a principal timpanist and personal manager with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. In addition to his performance activities, his work experience is centered around managing budgets and people in a diverse workplace. A graduate of the University of Toronto with a keen interest in history, he has led a life in the community in the arts, education, and sports. Lastly, Drew Garvey of the Communist Party of Canada. Drew is the Communist Party candidate running for MP for the University-Rosedale riding. After joining the party 15 years ago as a student activist at the University of Guelph, Mr. Garvey has since run as a federal candidate in the University-Rosedale riding in 2015, 19, and 21. Mr. Garvey would prioritize reversing the deep cost education made by the federal government, ending the privatization of post-secondary studies, and fighting for free post-secondary education. Mr. Garvey believes in the fundamental change, including nationalizing energy and natural resources, cutting the military budget by 75%, free education at all levels, doubling the corporate tax rate, and enacting progressive taxation based on ability to pay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. With those introductions, what we'd like to do is turn it over to the candidates. Just the random number sequencing machine that we have here has spit out the opening speaking order to be Stephen Taylor first, Nicole Robichaux second, Tim Grant third, Chrystia Freeland fourth. The closing remarks will be in the reverse order. And what we'll do as we're going through the questions is we'll try and ensure that every candidate has an equal opportunity to answer questions first, second, third, fourth, as best we can, given that we don't do this for a living. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen to introduce himself. Stephen.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Stephen Taylor, and I want to be your next member of Parliament. I will come straight to the point. Canada's Liberal government is making us poor, all of us, fast. The Liberal government also failed us in Afghanistan, doubled Canada's debt in 3 years, and instead of uniting Canadians on a great journey together, has divided them in every way possible. It has wasted Canada's reputation as a serious country. It has taken amateur hour and turned it into a best practice. But make no mistake, hardworking Canadians are paying the price. The issue here, the issue now in University-Rosedale is affordability. Liberal policies are driving up inflation. For too many people, it's becoming too expensive to live here. Too expensive for students. Too expensive for young families. Too expensive even for their parents on a fixed income. And if they want to sell and move, the Liberals want to tax the equity in their homes. Liberal debt and Liberal inflation are killing our community. Friends, I have no personal animus to my opponent, Ms. Freeland. But in this riding, she is the face of this Liberal government. She is the Deputy Prime Minister, a favorite of the Prime Minister. She should be. She's done half his job for the last couple of years. And she is also the Minister of Finance. So, Ms. Freeland must now own this disastrous consequences facing all Canadians of the disastrous policies she has overseen on Mr. Trudeau's behalf. That's why today I'm appealing to my neighbors in University-Rosedale to help me. Help Aaron O'Toole secure Canada's future. Secure it for all Canadians in this great country we love. Secure it across this amazing province at the heart of Confederation. Secure it in this wonderful part of Toronto. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate your comments. I'd like to turn it over now to Nicole, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the residents associations who brought us together this evening. I'm grateful to be here amongst the other candidates. As Stephen said, I also want to be your MP. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and what's brought me here with you tonight. As was mentioned in the introduction, I have a background in humanitarian work. I've been mostly working for the Red Cross over the past decade or so, responding to countless natural disasters, conflicts, and epidemics in Canada, but mostly overseas. And really through doing that work, I kept seeing the same people impacted over and over by crises, folks who are already vulnerable and living in precarious conditions to begin with. And although I still, of course, think humanitarian work is important, it's responding to a need, it doesn't really do anything to address the root causes of why certain people are disproportionately impacted by crises and the climate crisis. So really that's what's brought me here, to try and tackle those same issues, but at the root cause policy level. So I'm grateful to be here with you this evening and looking forward to the discussion that we're having.
Great, thanks very much, Nicole, and we'll turn it over to Tim.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Having a little hard time getting to the unmute button. Thanks again, and I echo Nicole and Stephen's comments about thanks and gratitude to the organizers. It's now the third debate of the Rosedale Moore Park Coalition, if I might call it that. And I'm sorry the ABC debate was not able to proceed, nor the one over here on the West End for lack of buy-in from some of the candidates. And I particularly I'm sorry we're not in sharing the stage together as fellow candidates. You develop a sense of camaraderie with each other. You get to know each other really well. And I'm sorry that Stephen and Nicole haven't had that experience, but hopefully you'll come back in another election and do so, because it really is, you do as a candidate learn a lot from each other. You know, I'm here to tell you about some of the Green Party ideas, but in the debate we just had a few weeks ago, or last week rather, on the environment, I learned a lot from Nicole Robichaux and Chrystia Freeland. As much as I do when you go door to door, yes, you've got a pitch for voters, but you hear their ideas too, and those help shape your own ideas. Look, there's three issues I just want to briefly mention here, just to kind of kick off the discussion. One that's not mentioned in any of the questions, but we have been advocating for a new deal for cities for some time. Canadian cities get only 10 cents of the tax dollar, and any decision they make can be overruled by provincial governments. And I myself, for the last year, worked with 9 Ontario cities, the mayors and their councils, who want to have charter city status for their cities so that they have a negotiated settlement that provides the funding and the decision-making power that they need. We are, of course, the party advocating the strongest climate change platform, and we are the only party that doesn't undermine our climate change goals by supporting pipelines, which are going to increase fossil fuel emissions. I look forward to the questions.
Thanks very much, Tim. And last but not least, Chrystia.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael, and thanks to you and John and all the residents associations for organizing this tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. C'est un très grand plaisir d'être parmi vous ce soir. And I agree with Tim. It's a shame we're not meeting in person. You do develop a camaraderie with your fellow candidates. So let me say a virtual hello to Tim. Great to see you, albeit virtually. Virtual hello to Nicole. Nice to see you again. And virtual hello to Stephen. Nice to meet you virtually for the first time. So my name is Chrystia Freeland, as you might have guessed from the signs behind me. I live in our wonderful community with my husband and 3 children. And since 2013, I've had the privilege of representing our community in Parliament. You know, as an MP for this community and as a minister, I think the things that I am most proud to have worked on are standing up for Canada and Canadians in the NAFTA negotiations and the Team Canada approach we took then. I am really proud of the role that our government played and the role I played in that effort in responding to the COVID pandemic, including getting vaccines for Canadians. And I'm really delighted as finance minister to have been leading the charge for early learning and childcare. We now are putting forward a plan which is ambitious, it is achievable, and it is transparent and fiscally responsible. I really look forward to talking about it more with my fellow candidates and with everyone who is listening to us and maybe asking us questions tonight. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks very much, Chrystia. What we'll do now is let's turn to the questions. Just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier in terms of administration, it's a direct question is 90 seconds for the person responding and 60 seconds for each of the other candidates, and general questions not specific to a particular candidate, it's 90 seconds each. John and I will be kind of flip-flopping back and forth between questions as we go through the various categories that we'd sent to you. There haven't, as I said, been a lot of changes since the questions that were sent out. The first question will be in foreign affairs and international policy, and this is actually the only question that's directed to a candidate. So the luck of the draw on being the incumbent, I guess, Chrystia. But it's a two-part question. The first part is, given the travesty of the Chinese justice system, where the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, have been imprisoned for an inordinately long period of time, and are pending sentencing at any point. We really don't know when. What is it specifically that your party is going to do to try and get them out? And the second part of that is, what is your strategy to dealing with China in the future, given that it is probably the #1 international brewing crisis globally?
Okay, Michael, can I ask you a logistics question
Yes.
before we start? Is that 90 seconds for both of those or 90 seconds together? And sorry for asking that.
Why don't we do 90 seconds for each, and it'll be 60 seconds therefore for each of the candidates to respond, because this is kind of a meaty one.
Okay, I was hoping you would say that. So let me start with the two Michaels. And I think it is really important to start by saying that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor are two brave Canadians who are behaving with incredible grit and determination in unforgivable circumstances. And the same is true of their families and friends who are supporting them. And I think it's also really important to condemn in the strongest possible terms the arbitrary detention of these two brave Canadians. Our response must be guided, I think, by three key principles. We can't give in to bullying. We must continue to be a rule of law country, and that means abiding by the decisions of our courts and our treaty obligations. And we need to work with our democratic allies to continue to apply pressure on China to release the two Michaels. And that is exactly what we are doing. And I'd like to give one proof point of that, which is just in February, we launched the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention. And there are now 65 countries that have signed on to that declaration. And we just have to continue to keep the pressure up, and we will. And I think that's something that all candidates here, I hope, will agree on.
Great, thanks. And at a broader level, Chrystia, the Chinese strategy?
So it flows very much from the approach I think we need to take on the two Michaels. I think our China strategy needs to begin with a recognition of the reality of China today. And that is that China today is an authoritarian communist regime that oppresses many of its people, including the Uyghurs, including people fighting for democracy in Hong Kong. And our foreign policy towards China needs to be based on that understanding. And like our policy around the world, it needs to be based on a willingness to stand up for human rights, including the Uyghurs and including the 300,000 Canadians who live in Hong Kong. In our relationship with China, we need to take national security and our national interest very much into account. That means we need to apply very careful scrutiny to investments into Canada. It means we need to work carefully on our supply chain and be sure it is resilient and that Canada is not vulnerable there. And then finally, and this is perhaps the most important point, I think the world, the democratic world, is at a pivotal moment when it comes to China. And we need to be working with the world's democracies, our allies, on a united China policy. And we are.
Thank you. We'll turn to Tim next, please. Tim gets 60 seconds. That's right.
60 times 2.
Yeah, one for each.
He's muted.
He's muted. Oh, can you start him over? Can you unmute him?
I can only send an ask for him.
There we
It's okay. I have family members who would like to see me muted more often, so it's not a big surprise when I get muted. Look, I think, yes, there is, I certainly from the Green Party, would be our central point, is that we need a multilateral effort to deal with China. There are many, many countries finding themselves in the crosshairs of China, but we're also in the crosshairs of other authoritarian countries. And so in a way, that multilateral effort is also important in dealing with other countries that that are serial human rights abusers. I think that's absolutely critical if we're going to have any chance of freeing the two Michaels or having any leverage to deal with the crisis in Hong Kong or with the 1 million Uyghurs who've been also imprisoned, frankly, to call it what it is. I do want to raise a separate issue, and this may be my second question, so I don't know whether I want to jump into this. Yes, I'll hold off to the second 60 seconds.
Right. Go ahead. China
Sure.
strategy.
Yeah, I think, it's also really important for us to, if there are countries that are abusive and are abusing Canadians in the way China is, for example, it also behooves us, again, to begin to reconsider our trade policies with those countries. Chrystia made a brief reference. China provides us with about 4% of our imports and 6% of our exports. It's not, most Canadians think both numbers are much higher. We need, and much of what we export is raw materials. And we've long known that we've needed federal leadership and provincial leadership to really rein in the export of raw materials and develop value-added processing that creates jobs here in Canada. And yes, that is also going to be in replacing imports from authoritarian countries that do not respect human rights. And that's going to help us ramp up domestic manufacturing that we've lost in the last couple of decades.
Thanks, Tim. Nicole, would you like to go next?
Yeah, as a humanitarian worker with a background in human rights, I'm deeply committed to ensuring that all nations, no matter who they are, Canada included, should be taken into account for their human rights abuse records. I actually spent some time in the UN at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva several years ago, where the international community was trying to take China to account for some of these human rights abuses. I think I would need way more than 90 seconds to talk about that whole process. But I'll mention in terms of what a new Democrat government would do, we definitely would stand up to China with a strong and coherent strategy to defend Canadian interests at home and abroad, and call out human rights abuses, as well as stand with Hong Kong pro-democracy asylum seekers and provide coordinated support for those facing threats by Chinese entities here in Canada.
Great. And in terms of a broader China strategy and how what you would do to have Canada deal with China, you want to provide feedback on that? Chrystia, or I'm sorry, Nicole, you get another 60 seconds.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry. I think I said everything in the 90 seconds. I didn't realize we had two.
That's okay, not a problem. We can always buy back time. So we'll let you run over a little bit later on. Stephen, how would you like to handle that?
Well, firstly, the Conservative Party will stand up against the communist government in China. They are not our friends. In relation to the two Michael situation, it's absolutely horrendous what's happened. Two Canadian citizens are effectively becoming bargaining chips in geopolitics, and not enough has been done by the Liberal government. For the first 9 months of their detention, we had no ambassador. That is a failure of leadership. We can and must do better. Why isn't the Prime Minister and why isn't the Foreign Minister making this one of Canada's #1 priorities? Canadian citizens are being held by the Chinese government, the communist government. This is completely unacceptable. We oppose it. We cannot continue to have a relationship of ambiguity with the Communist Party of China as the Liberals do. What the minister was saying earlier is quite different from their track record over the past 5 to 6 years, which I'm happy to talk about in the next 1 minute. Over the past 6 years, we all remember the 2015 election. Justin Trudeau was very happy to talk about a comprehensive free trade, progressive partnership deal with the Communist Party in China. They wanted a deal with China. They didn't get it. Trudeau just released a book deal. We're just finding about this today, possibly with the government of China. He has even said himself, I admire the Communist Party of China. That is mixed messaging. And when we're trying to negotiate getting Canadians back, and we have that kind of mixed messaging, it's very confusing. We must stand up to the Communist government of China. Its leadership represents clear, rising threat to Canadian interests and values. They've abducted our citizens. They're targeting our economy. They're intimidating members of the Chinese community here in Canada. This is completely unacceptable. Furthermore, the Liberals have had the government of China do military training within Canada not that long ago. We need to stand up to the Communist government of China and build a new Asia-Pacific strategy immediately, and Conservatives will do that.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we'd like to move on to immigration. It's a very important part, as we all understand, of Canada's growth. With COVID, many of the new immigrants to Canada have been held up in countries of origin, and we're hoping that with COVID somewhat abating, that they can get to Canada. But also, the Liberal government has added new targets or new quotas for new immigrants into Canada. What would your strategy be for immigration in Canada to allow the population to grow productively and drive the economy? Why don't we start with Stephen?
In a post-pandemic economic recovery, Canadian immigration must once again be rooted in our democratic values and inclusive, successful economic growth worthy of a rebuilding and a rising nation. Those who wish to come to Canada deserve a plan that provides clarity and a process that treats them with dignity, compassion, and respect. But the Liberal government record when it comes to immigration is one of mismanagement, year-long backlogs, and failure. Make no mistake, the Conservative Party of Canada supports immigration, supports multiculturalism. The Liberals have failed to effectively manage the immigration system during the pandemic. Justin Trudeau's failed to put forward a plan to ensure a fair, orderly, and compassionate immigration process during this pandemic. We also believe we need to look at recognizing more foreign credentials. So many new Canadians arrive with tremendous credentials. They can do all sorts of incredible work in this country, yet this Liberal government has failed to allow them to reach their full potential, to use their credentials. We will immediately look to recognize more foreign credentials, help new Canadians, help make Canada a stronger country by doing this.
Thank you. Chrystia?
Thanks, Michael, for the question. And thanks everyone for posing this really important question. I really believe that immigration and Canada's ability to welcome new Canadians is one of the secret sauces of our country. It's one of the things that makes Canada so wonderful, and it actually is such a powerful driver of economic growth and something that really distinguishes us from really most of the other Western democracies, which are facing today real demographic challenges. That is why our government is very committed to immigration. During COVID, for health reasons, we weren't able to admit as many new Canadians as we'd like. And that's why we have higher targets for the coming years. More than 400,000 in 2021, 411,000 in 2022, and 421,000 in 2023. And I'd also like to remind people of the Global Skills Strategy, which promises you a 2-week answer for highly skilled immigrants. And this is working so well that actually there was a congressional hearing held in the United States over the summer talking about how the US is falling behind Canada when it comes to getting highly skilled migrants. The title of the hearing was, "Oh Canada, how outdated US immigration policies push top talent to other countries." So it's working and we need to double down.
Thank you. Nicole?
One of the things that I feel the most passionate about is making it easier for folks fleeing violence to come to Canada. I've been to refugee camps all over the world, and it's always been so frustrating for me to tell people I'm from Canada and see their faces light up because they've heard all of the stories about Canada being so open and welcoming and letting in 25,000 Syrians. And then I have to explain to them the really difficult year-long bureaucratic process that most of them won't even qualify for, and seeing their faces fall. So one of the things that I'm most passionate about is making it easier, taking away some of that bureaucracy. And you know, as somebody who's from the queer community, I also am passionate about making it easier for LGBTQ refugees to come here. And you know, in speaking about migrant workers, I think we need to recognize, especially during the pandemic, those folks have really borne the brunt of the crisis in many instances, and we need to have a clear path for them to be able to stay here.
Great, thanks very much, Nicole. Tim?
Thank you. Well, I first of all, I would echo and applaud Nicole's excellent comments about refugees, including LGBT folks who are fleeing violence in their own countries. We have had too many barriers in recent years, and many refugee advocates have made that point. Stephen made a very good point also about the barriers, the credential barriers to highly skilled new Canadians who come to Canada and are unable to make the jump into the professions that they so long trained for in their own countries. But he also failed to note that it's just as much a problem of the Harper government of 8 years as it has been for the last 6 years of the Liberals. There have been steps taken, let's be honest, by several governments over the last 20 years, but the problem remains that too many people are driving taxis. What we need is an integration program, not just we're going to accept credentials. We need an integration program that gives people on the job paid training, mentors, working with mentors, Canadian professionals in their fields, working alongside while they are paid to take courses to upgrade their skills in any ways that are needed for the particular professions in Canada. Beyond that, of course, we support immigration. I think there's unanimity probably across the board here, but we think Canada has more work to do to achieve an equitable and just multiculturalism. Beyond what I've just mentioned, we also need to prioritize senior care and long-term care skills for immigration status, given what the pandemic has laid waste to our healthcare system.
Great, thanks very much. Moving on to First Nations justice and reconciliation. This has become, well, it's been an issue for hundreds of years. It's become particularly to the forefront as a result of the finding of bodies from the residential schools. Who to trust at a federal level and on issues of reconciliation and Indigenous justice is a real challenge. With the ongoing issues with water quality, poor housing, residential schools, just the history there, finding these bodies, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and the lack of really execution on all the various recommendations. What's your party's strategy to solve, or at least move down a path more proactively to address the issues of Canada's Indigenous peoples? Why don't we start with Nicole?
First off, I wanted to acknowledge that as a white settler, I've benefited from systems that have oppressed Indigenous peoples my entire life, and I'm committed to reconciliation and to dismantling these systems. A new Democrat government will make sure that Indigenous communities have safe housing and clean drinking water. We'll also fully implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and all 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We'll also work with Indigenous peoples to co-develop a national action plan for reconciliation, and through legislation, we'll establish a National Council for Reconciliation to provide oversight and accountability for this process. You know, you mentioned the children. It's time to find every child and bring them home. We will fully fund the search for grave sites at former residential schools. In order for there to be reconciliation, we recognize that there must also be truth, accountability, and justice, and we'll ensure the appointment of a special prosecutor to pursue those who've inflicted harm on Indigenous children in Canada's residential school system.
Great. Thank you. Tim?
Thank you for the question. It's a little hard to address this in 90 seconds. I will just say that just personally, for example, as the Green Teacher editor for 25 years, we published enormous amounts of material by Indigenous educators about how to bring Indigenous perspectives into mainstream elementary and high schools. And I myself am currently involved in 2 reconciliation projects, one the land back project in the Ottawa Valley and another an education project. It is complex. I think the problem we've had in Canada is that governments largely react to crisis. We've known about the buried children for a long time. You could have read 15 years ago Richard Wagame's very popular young adult novel that talked about his own experience in to know that there were buried children in the school that he went to. And so we tend to be reacting to the latest crisis. And when I looked at our own platform as it was emerging in the last several months, what was quite striking about each of the provisions was it recognized that we have to turn the leadership over to First Nations, not just in creating mental health programs, but also in healthcare systems that respect Indigenous knowledge, and in overcoming the bureaucratic disagreements over jurisdiction. As an educator, again, I've been grieved for decades knowing that federally funded schools on reserve still to this day have 33% less funding than what kids in provincially funded schools enjoy. We have a lot of work to do.
Thanks very much, Tim. Chrystia?
So thank you very much, Michael, for the question. And I really do believe and hope that broadly this is going to be one of those where there is broad agreement between us that this is a huge moral challenge Canada faces, and we have a huge amount of work to do. In the budget that I tabled in April, there's $18 billion for supporting Indigenous people in Canada and reconciliation. And that goes for everything from healthcare services to early learning and childcare to housing and water. And I would like to echo Nicole, and I hope all of us in saying that I fully support UNDRIP and its implementation, and our party does. But I'd just like to conclude by talking about an aspect of reconciliation I think we should all be talking about more. On Saturday, I was in Cape Breton, and I had the chance to meet with an amazing person, Chief Terry Paul of Membertou. And he is one of the people who led the acquisition of Clearwater Seafoods, which is now 50% Indigenous owned. And that acquisition is transformative for Canada and for Atlantic Canada and for the fishery. And I think we need to, in addition to all this other stuff, really start focusing on Indigenous entrepreneurship, Indigenous prosperity. And that's something that I'm really committed to doing, working with Indigenous people.
Thank you. Stephen?
Canada's Conservatives believe in building true partnership to ensure just, secure place for thriving, self-determining, Indigenous nations within the fabric of Canada. That starts with making Indigenous rights a top priority, and that is the lens through which we will approach all Indigenous issues. Our goal is to give Indigenous people the skills they need and the respect they deserve to be able to reach their goals. And I'll remind everyone, it was a Conservative government that created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as part of the 2007 Residential School Settlement Agreement, which recognized that the residential school system had a profoundly lasting and damaging impact on Indigenous culture, heritage, and language. Canada's Conservatives acknowledge the deep sorrow and mourning that all Indigenous people and survivors of residential schools are experiencing. Our hearts grieve for the Indigenous communities who are sharing in this trauma.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephen. We're going to turn it over to John now, and there's a question on climate change.
Thank you. So I think most of the participants here this evening are familiar with the respective party platforms on climate change. We'd like you to address it, but we also like you to address it in the context that Toronto and the GTA is roughly just under 20% of the GDP, represents just under 20% of the GDP of Canada. And in the GTA, there are approximately 6.5 million individuals living here. So if you can frame your policy and your position on climate change and going forward a green economy in that context, that'd be very helpful. Perhaps we can start with, well, let's start with Tim. Oh, yeah, Tim, there we go.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the question. In fact, for the past year, I've actually worked with the City of Toronto Better Homes TO department, and this is a group of people who absolutely have a good grasp on how Toronto can address the climate emergency. The problem is they lack resources. I'm actually leading a local community effort initiated by the Harvard Village Residents Association, and now working in collaboration with 26 communities to work with the Better Homes TO department. The problem is at the moment, the only tools we have are one-off grants for, $5,000 grants for homeowners, but only $750,000, and $5,000 grants for new electric vehicles, nothing for used, nothing for electric bikes. So whereas what we really need is a much larger scale of ambition. Climate experts have said that if we're going to meet our goals, we need a national retrofit program over 10 years for the 10 million buildings, industrial, commercial, residential, and which the Canadian Labour Congress has said would create 4 million jobs. So there's a huge economic spin-off, not just in Toronto, but beyond if we were to do that. So we think that's a key component. We also think just on climate change, I'm going to step away from the city aspect for a moment. Climate change has been a political football for way too long. I'm glad at least all four of our parties now acknowledge the need for a price on carbon. That was not the case and derailed our discussions last time. But we think it's time for an inter-cabinet that brings representatives of all the parties in Parliament together to develop policy coherence so climate change is no longer a political football.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, would you like to go next on this question, please?
Absolutely. Canada's Conservatives have a serious plan to combat climate change that allows us to meet our targets and reduce our emissions by 2030. We all want a green future for our children. Conservatives are natural conservers. Same word. Our goal is a future of clean air, pure water, where Canada's beautiful wild spaces are protected, including here in Toronto in our ravines. We're blessed to be in such a beautiful, clean, green city that Toronto is. We will fight climate change and protect the environment, but we won't do it on the backs of hardworking Canadians or by hurting our economy. Instead of sending your money to Ottawa, low carbon savings accounts help Canadians make greener lifestyle choices while allowing them to decide what works best for them and their family. Canada's Conservatives will work with the provinces to implement an innovative and national personal low carbon savings account. We will also work to promote zero emission vehicles. LCSA, or low carbon savings accounts, will incentivize Canadians to make greener lifestyle choices that reduce their emissions while also allowing them to decide what works best for them and their families. We're putting more choice to consumers and helping businesses grow while fighting pollution.
Thank you, Stephen. Chrystia, if you don't mind going next, please.
Not at all, John. So this, of course, is a really important question. 3 of us devoted a whole debate to it. And let me just start by talking about what are the key drivers of our party's climate plan. Number 1, a price on pollution. This is absolutely essential. It works, it's efficient, going up to $170 a ton by 2030. Number 2, a hard cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector and targets to get down to net zero by 2050. And number 3, we know that this big transformation costs money. So we've invested $100 billion in climate action since we formed government. What does that mean for us in University-Rosedale and in Toronto? Well, we need to change the way we get around. And that's why we're committing to 50% electric vehicles by 2030. That's why we've invested in public transit and in bike lanes. I rode my bike to my campaign headquarters today. We need to retrofit our homes, and that's why we have a program of $5,000 grants, $40,000 loans to help people in our riding do exactly that. And I agree with Stephen about how great our ravines are. And that's why in the budget that I tabled in April, we included $20 million for a strategy for Toronto's ravines. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrystia. Nicole, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as a humanitarian worker who's been on the front lines of the climate crisis and really seen disasters happen more and more frequently, I agree with Tim. We need to take the politics out of the climate crisis and treat it like we treated the pandemic, and come together and make the big and bold changes that we know need to happen. In terms of the New Democrats plan, we have climate throughout our entire 115-page document. Everything that we do, we're considering the impacts on the climate crisis. We have a target of reducing Canada's emissions by at least 50% by 2030. And we also want to create a climate accountability office to provide independent oversight of the federal climate progress. In terms of the city and University-Rosedale, we want to retrofit every building by 2040. And we commit to ending all government subsidies for fossil fuels. And we'll also fulfill Canada's G20 commitment to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and redirect the funds into low carbon initiatives.
Thank you, Nicole. Well, I would like to now move to a question that is also very topical, especially during this past year and a half. And that is your positions on the income insecurity and your positions on creating a guaranteed livable income program that would ensure all Canadians have a secure economic floor to stand on. And Chrystia, why don't we start with you, please? Sorry.
Sorry, I was struggling there with my mute button. So let me just start by saying, our government understood when the pandemic hit that our first responsibility was to be sure that all Canadians were taken care of. And that's why we launched an unprecedented response. 8 million Canadians at some point received the CERB. And during the campaign, I've knocked on doors across the country and people have told me it transformed their lives. And 5.3 million jobs have been protected by the wage subsidy. Now, going forward, I think what we need to continue to do is make Canada's social safety net, which it's so wonderful that we have one and we're a country that believes in that, continue to plug the gaps and cover more and more people. The Canada Child Benefit has done that. It has lifted more than 400,000 Canadian children out of poverty. The Canada Worker Benefit, which we increased in the budget tabled in April, will lift another 100,000 Canadians out of poverty. Early learning and childcare, which we are on the brink of finally achieving for the whole country, will help the most vulnerable Canadian children the most, make life affordable for all Canadian families, and drive economic growth. Lots more to say, but that's a start.
Thank you. Stephen, can you please respond to that question?
Our priority are jobs and getting us out of COVID-19 and getting our economy back on track. And we have a plan for that. We will pay at least 25% of the salary of net new hires for 6 months after the CEWS expires. We will cover up to 50% of the salary for those who've been unemployed for 6 months or more. We'll even review the tax system to improve competitiveness, bring rates down, and simplify the rules. Our ambition is to create 1 million new jobs lost during the pandemic in our first year in office. It's absolutely essential that we rebuild our jobs market and get Canadians working again. This Liberal government has failed Canadians when it comes to jobs. Unemployment is at record heights. We are unable to help small businesses. We need to create more economic opportunities for Canadians to get them out of despair and trouble. The Conservatives have a plan. We will do all we can to help get our economy back and help get ordinary Canadians back to work so they can have dignity and make a living.
Thank you, Steve. Tim, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. You know, when I saw this question, I coming from a residents association, I had said to myself, must be coming from a Green Party member. It's kind of one of those questions you get lobbed that you really enjoy. Look, for 10 years, and some in this audience know this, I have been, our parties, provincially and federally, have been championing basic income, or what we've come to call guaranteed livable income. There's a reason why we phrase it that way. Guaranteed but I'll back up a little bit. We used to mostly talk about the impact on low-income Canadians, and indeed that remains the case. A guaranteed livable income for all Canadians will ensure that no one falls through the cracks of the overlapping federal, provincial, and municipal welfare programs. But it's also more urgent coming out of the pandemic that youth who are on average coming out of community colleges and universities with $28,000 worth of debt are unable to launch new businesses, retrain, go back to school because of that debt. So here's what guaranteed livable income actually means. It's not the same amount in every community in Canada. And Statistics Canada has what's called a market basket index that indicates the cost of living per community. Guaranteed livable income is going to be much higher in Toronto than it will be in Cobequid, Ontario. No disrespect to Cobequid. And it also gets, all Canadians get it, but they get less as their income rises. We think that's a responsible way that's going to put an anchor under all Canadians and allow us to move out of the pandemic, especially.
Thank you, Tim. Nicole.
New Democrats fought hard during the pandemic for CERB to be doubled, for contract workers and students to be able to qualify for support as well. And really taking care of our most vulnerable is reflected and woven throughout the NDP commitments in everything that we're proposing. We absolutely believe in introducing a basic guaranteed livable income, and we will start immediately with raising seniors and every person living with a disability above the poverty line. And this will be complemented as well with investments in housing and healthcare and post-secondary education and training. In time, what we want to do is expand all income security programs to ensure everyone in Canada has access to a guaranteed livable basic income.
Thank you, Nicole. So the next question is a corollary set, of those two previous questions, which is we have, by historical standards, now a very, very, very significant deficit in this country. And therefore, and we also are discussing new income support programs going forward, or the continuation of income support programs going forward. So with as much specificity as possible, how will we pay for this? How will you respectively pay for this? And when I say specificity, marginal tax rates, what's your thoughts on where they're going to go? The HST, fuel taxes, etc. And who goes first now? I'm not sure. Stephen, thank you. Stephen, you can go first then.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very important question. The debt has doubled since 2015, 628 billion. Our current debt stands at 1.2 trillion. Interest rates are rising. The PBO says, the PBO is saying that we will not be able to balance our budget until 2070 under this trajectory. Frankly, it's unacceptable. This overspending, mismanagement by the Liberals has to stop. Canada's Conservative Party will balance the budget within 10 years. The PBO confirmed under our plan, this can get accomplished within 7 years. We will beat COVID through vaccination and testing. We will build infrastructure. We will provide immediate help for the hardest hit sectors. We will support small businesses. We will attract investment, encourage innovation, increase trade. We all know Liberals don't respect small businesses. In fact, the Globe and Mail said that Liberals think that small businesses are cheats. We need to do more. We will also offer a GST holiday in December to help small businesses. This will put money back into the economy. It will get consumers to spend more. This will help our economy. This will help move Canada's economy forward.
Thank you, Steve. Chrystia?
Yeah. Hi, John. So I am somewhat going to challenge your framing of the question, because I think the way we need to approach the fiscal and economic challenge Canada faces is to say, what is a fiscally responsible plan for jobs and growth? And that is what I really believe that our party is putting forward. It started during the pandemic with unprecedented support to small businesses, to Canadians, to avoid economic scarring. And that is really helping our economy to be in a position to come roaring back. The fact is, we have now the latest jobs numbers really made me happy, because they showed we recovered 95% of jobs lost during the COVID recession, compared to just 76% in the US. Now what we need to do is focus on growth strategies. That's early learning and childcare. That is the green transition. That is getting everyone vaccinated. And John, I want to assure you, our plan is fiscally responsible. After I tabled the budget, S&P and Moody's both reaffirmed Canada's AAA credit rating. It doesn't get better than that. And when it comes to external vindication, the Institute of Fiscal Studies looked at all the parties' economic plans. They gave us the highest rating, and I'm afraid that they rated the Conservatives a fail on responsible fiscal management.
Thank you. Tim.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. Look, it's obvious to all in this debate, and really over the last 2 years, the question of debt and deficit has kind of been sidetracked from the national conversation, simply because in a pandemic, governments had to spend what we needed to keep people safe and to keep businesses afloat. And then that's responsible budgeting. And so I echo our MP's comments in that regard. Look, we think it's important, but we have to also talk about how we're going to pay for the expansive programs that our party has put forth. And we do talk about raising the corporate tax rates to 19%, the same as in the US. They've been brought down by successive governments, and we need to bring that back. We also would apply a 1% tax on family net worth above about 20 million. And we close stock option tax loopholes that benefit the wealthy, and close the offshore tax evasion that companies and wealthy individuals use to hide their earnings in offshore tax havens, and force those companies to prove that they're actually functioning businesses in those jurisdictions. Those are a couple of things. We'd also think the Canada Revenue Agency has been very clear. It does not have the resources to go after tax evasion of wealthy Canadians. It's much easier for them to penalize poor Canadians who don't pay their taxes.
Thanks, Tim. Nicole, please.
Yeah, just to echo what Tim lastly said there, you know, I have a friend who works as a server and had to pay back thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to CRA after being audited. So I think it's completely unacceptable that the folks who have profited the most off of this pandemic have likely taken all of their money offshore to avoid paying taxes here. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's a bit of misinformation that NDP governments can't balance budgets. And if you go back and look at our provincial NDP governments, we do have a history of balancing budgets. So our plan for the deficit is actually to tax those who have profited the most on this pandemic, and we don't want to decrease spending because we know folks need it right now. So we want to increase public spending in areas such as healthcare and climate action and income and housing supports. And to offset this $214 billion in spending, we plan to bring in $166 billion in new revenue streams by significantly raising taxes on the wealthy and not the working class. So we really want to make the wealthy pay for our recovery through those measures.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it. My next question, let me see if I can frame it in a way that we can all agree on. The minister earlier used the term scrutiny of investments into Canada. So as it relates to China, so I want to talk about housing and a housing strategy, and specifically affordable housing and affordable housing policy versus the very significant inflow of capital sheltering inflow of capital that is sheltering in real estate in Canada. How do you square these two facts? And I'd like to start with Nicole again, please.
Sorry, I had an issue with my computer. Can you repeat that question? Sorry about that.
There we go. I was muted now this time. There we go. Affordable housing, the issue of affordable housing, and how do we square that with the effective appreciation or the inflation in housing that's being partially driven by the inflow of capital into Canada?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, New Democrats want to make sure that we have a foreign tax in place so that we can work towards having more affordable housing in this city. We also want to create 500,000 units across the country of affordable housing in the next 10 years, and half of that we want to finish in the next 5 years. And we'll achieve this by working in partnership with provinces and municipalities. And we also want to provide rental support as well for co-ops and ensure that we're meeting our environmental efficiency goals with anything that we're building. We also, in order to kickstart the construction of co-ops, social and not-for-profit housing, we want to increase funding and set up a dedicated fast start funds to streamline the application process as well and help communities get the expertise and assistance that they need. We also want to mobilize federal resources and lands for these projects and turn unused and underused properties into vibrant new communities. New Democrats believe that housing is a human right, and we will ensure that it's treated as such. Again, funding by making those who have profited from the pandemic pay their fair share.
Thank you, Nicole. Tim.
Let me say something that's not on our platform first, because I think your point about foreign buyers is an indication really that we're never going to solve the affordable housing crisis until we remove housing as an investment. We need to discourage people from owning second homes. We need to discourage foreign buyers from buying homes. That's critical if we're ever going to help keep housing costs down. That's the fundamental one. And I myself am sitting here in a house in which, when my spouse and I leave or sell this house, we pay no capital gains on this particular house. It's not part of our platform yet, but I think we need an honest conversation amongst Canadians about the privileges that are afforded to those who have the financial means to buy a house. But look, we too have ambitious plans for building new affordable housing and retrofitting existing affordable housing. But we think it's not really likely that any of our party's platforms are going to be achieved unless we have something like a minister of housing who works directly with the provinces, make sure that they're actually going to build their share of affordable housing, and frankly, be willing to transfer the units to provinces that are more willing to partner. We also would cancel first-time homeowner grants that, while they sound great in an election, they're actually counterproductive because they drive up the cost of housing to the very people they're intended to reflect. And finally, cities need the ability, well, I think I've run out of time.
Thank you, Tim. Chrystia, please.
Thank you, John. And John, I hope you saw that it was with a smile that I challenged your question. And I want you to know, as a member of your residents association, I really appreciate all the hard work you do there. And just a small thing I'd like to say directly to Tim. We have had in the previous government a minister of housing, that was Ahmed Hussein. That's one of his key roles. And the only reason I mention that is not to be like nitpicky, but just because Ahmed is a beloved colleague of mine, and I think he's done a great job on housing. And I think you would like him if you've never met him, Tim. And John, to the place you started the housing question, I think that's a really important point. And the reality in the world today is we're very lucky to be Canadian. Canada is a safe, democratic, rule of law country. And that means that a lot of people with a lot of money who live in countries that are not safe rule of law countries are looking for a place to store their assets. And Canadian homes can't be that place. Canadian homes need to be homes for Canadian families, not a place for foreign plutocrats to store their money. And that's why in the budget that we tabled in April, we committed to introducing a tax on vacant housing owned by non-Canadians. And in our platform, we've committed to a 2-year moratorium on foreign purchases of Canadian homes. A lot more to say on affordable housing, but my time is up.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Stephen.
Well, to follow up what the minister was discussing, will she introduce a home tax? That's what Canadians want to know. And that's the elephant in the room. Without question, currently in Canada, we have a crisis with housing. Prices are out of control, particularly in the Greater Toronto area. I remember in 2015 when the Liberals campaigned on a platform of the middle class and helping the middle class. They were the party of the middle class. Only us Liberals could save the middle class, I remember. 6 years later, the middle class in the Toronto area can't afford housing. We have a housing crisis. Canada's Conservatives have a recovery plan that will address housing, and we will make homes more affordable for Canadians. Our plan includes the following. We will build more homes. We will build 1 million homes in the next 3 years. We will build more homes near publicly funded transit. We will provide more Canadians with a path to home ownership by making it easier for more families to get a mortgage. We'll ban foreign investors from buying homes here in Canada if they are not planning to move to Canada and live in that home. We encourage foreign investment in affordable, purpose-built rental housing for Canadians. We would address the soaring cost of renting a home by partnering with municipalities and the private sector to bring new rental units into the market.
Thanks very much, Stephen. We'd like to jump over to something that's fairly topical, COVID. Somehow, we seem to have been caught totally off guard by COVID in terms of pandemic preparedness. Not enough PPE or no PPE, no vaccines being made in Canada anymore, in spite of the fact that we're getting them, but from foreign sources, et cetera. They say that the next pandemic is only around the corner. It's just a question of where and when. What would your plan be to create a more resilient Canada that can deal with things like pandemics or massive weather events that are affecting our country everywhere? Because they're all related to the same kinds of issues. And what specifically would you be recommending for Canada? And then maybe also for the GTA, because we're such a large area and such a large portion of Canada. Why don't we start with Stephen?
When COVID-19 hit, the Liberal government wasn't ready. Caught unprepared, they made bad decisions that cost lives and crippled our economy. Canada's Conservatives will ensure Canada is ready to face future pandemics, including the elevated risk of bioterrorism threats. Our goal is simple: be prepared and take rapid action so that we protect the health of Canadians while avoiding long-term impacts on the economy, and in particular, mental health, something we want to talk more about tonight. That's one of our core pillars. And another one of our pillars that relates directly to this topic is securing our country by having a stockpile of made in Canada essential medical products. We need to push more made in Canada medical products. We need to prepare for future pandemics, for future disasters by creating products here in Canada, by being prepared. Pandemics, this is probably not going to be the last one. We need to have a better plan for the future. This Liberal government was completely caught off guard. And may I remind everyone, it was us Conservatives pushing for vaccines. Months they were delayed. It went on and on. We led the way on that. We need to never let this happen again. We need to have a strategy in place so that essential medical equipment, vaccines, masks, all of the above are made here in Canada and available here in Canada at all times.
All right, thank you. Chrystia, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. And I'm going to take a little bit of my precious time just to offer real clarity on a housing canard which was raised. So I want to be very clear that our party has no intention of removing the capital gains exemption on the sale of the principal residence. Our platform is clear on that. The Prime Minister has been clear on that in answer to questions. And I am happy to be very clear on that tonight. Any assertion to the contrary is simply and utterly false. So I really need to say that to my neighbors. Now on pandemic preparedness. Look, the most important thing is finish the fight against the pandemic we still have. And that means we have to get vaccinated. Everyone who is eligible needs to get vaccinated. And we need the strongest possible vaccine mandates. We need to be sure, for example, that all the candidates, all the people running to represent Canadians have been fully vaccinated. And that's something our party totally stands for. I agree with you, Michael. We need to be ready for the next pandemic. And our government has already done a deal with Moderna to manufacture vaccines here in Canada. Those Moderna vaccines have helped us so much in the fight against COVID. We've done a deal with Sanofi to manufacture vaccines here in Toronto.
Great, thank you, Chrystia. I've lost track here. Stephen, Christia's gone, then Tim.
Thank you. Well, Michael, you referred to the next pandemic around the corner, but I think it's important to remember that we had a pandemic before this called SARS, and the very recommendations of SARS were the ones that we failed to follow, which is to maintain PPE and various measures that indeed that we didn't do. And that's been well documented. It's not a Green Party argument that I think that left us unprepared. And indeed, as Stephen said, we don't have domestic manufacturing capacity. That's left us also very much at the mercy of foreign companies. And we still don't know the cost of the vaccines that were purchased. The Liberals did a great job of purchasing massive numbers, but we kind of worry about how much they actually paid compared to other countries. That's not my big beef, however. I think we still have a problem, and I have to tell you, as a Harvard Village resident, I have two University of Toronto scientists from the Department of Chemical Engineering who pass my door every day, who've been working on a project for which they call it natural neutralizing antibodies, but it's a COVID treatment that is very effective, especially for people who've had COVID as well, that they've been unable to get any attention from Health Canada. And there was a big article in the Star about this. This is not just me telling you this. You can reference it. But the Italian government they're now negotiating with the Italian government because their goal was to sell this, to provide this at cost to ideally Canadians, but if it has to be Italy first, Italy's putting the dollars forward. And we really need much more interest in the Canadian government in homegrown solutions.
Thank you, Tim. Nicole?
Yeah, I wanted to maybe just touch and start off with talking about resiliency, because that was in your question. And it's something that I think about a lot in the context of my humanitarian work, because people often ask me or tell me when they learn I do humanitarian work, how hard it must be to see so many terrible things all the time. But actually, what's amazing is to see how resilient communities are and how they come together in a crisis. And we've seen that here in our community during COVID-19. But what we need on top of that is a government who's willing to invest in that resiliency. And in humanitarian work, all too often, we have limited resources to respond to a crisis. And part of an operational plan to respond to a crisis always has what we call disaster risk reduction. So that's resiliency for future disasters. And often that's the first thing to get cut, because that's not meeting immediate needs, which of course is important. So really we need to invest, we need to put the money in there, and the NDP is prepared to do that. And to echo Tim as well, just talking about lessons learned, after every humanitarian operation I've ever responded to, there's always a lessons learned workshop. There are always reports that come out. And so we didn't use the lessons learned from SARS. And so I really hope that we use the lessons learned from this.
Great, thanks very much. Just moving on to a topic that's come up a couple of times this evening by you folks discussing it, which is healthcare. It seems like we're held out as a model, but it's broken if you live within it. And on top of that, if you have any mental health issues, especially young people in this country, the time to see a specialist is years sometimes. And I defy anybody to name two recently graduated psychiatrists that you know. So what is your strategy to try and deal with healthcare, and then specifically mental health in Canada? Why don't we start with Tim?
Thank you. Well, that's a great question. And indeed, we think that one of the things we would do right off the top is renegotiate the Canada Health Accord to prioritize the expansion of mental health services. They have to become finally regarded as medically necessary. We would also dedicate specific funding to strengthening the integration of public health and community-based primary care as the first point of contact with the healthcare system. And finally, I think, again, going back to the COVID situation, we need to provide the Public Health Agency of Canada with the long-term funding to protect public health and be ready with surge capacity in the event of another crisis. And finally, I think, as the son of a 103-year-old father who has just started down the road of dementia, still a wonderful guy, but I think we also need a national dementia strategy. And we need to work with health professionals and provincial territorial governments to develop and fund it. And finally, at a time when private health clinics, especially blood services, represent a creeping kind of two-tiered system that is eroding the primary universal healthcare system that we so value. We really need to reinforce the principles, and the Green Party is entirely committed to those principles and requirements of the Canada Health Act and to extending that model to other aspects of healthcare.
Thank you, Tim. Nicole?
I want to first off thank you for bringing up mental health, because I think it's something that there still is a lot of stigma around and that we don't talk enough about and don't push to have as much support for. So thank you for that question. And even in my own field in humanitarian work, there's a lot of fear of talking about mental health, for fear to not be sent out in a humanitarian context again. So I think also, just in terms of the pandemic, I was having a conversation with my doctor recently, and she was making the link between refugees coming here after being on the road for many years and being in fight or flight, and finally coming here and being relaxed, and all of the trauma coming back and needing supports around that. And she was making the link between COVID and how she thinks there's going to be a real large increase whenever this pandemic is done with mental health need and mental health supports. So the NDP want to add mental health as part of our national healthcare program, and not only mental health, but pharmacare as well, dental as well. We are the reason why we have a publicly funded healthcare system here because of Tommy Douglas, and we want to expand it now to cover our whole body, including our mental health.
Thanks, Nicole. Chrystia?
Thanks, Michael. And Tim, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I think that COVID has made us all maybe think a little bit more and cherish a little bit more our elders. Are we frozen? Okay. So, and certainly that's how I feel about my own dad, who got sick during COVID, but he's okay.
All right, we're all still online here, so we're all used to Zoom calls where somebody freezes. So Chrystia has frozen, but the rest is still active.
Oh, she's free now.
Oh, no, not yet.
She's frozen still. Yeah.
She's still frozen. Either that or she's speaking very slowly. So I guess what we'll do is go to the next person here, who's Stephen. If you're okay with that, Stephen.
Yeah, no, these Zoom calls, we can, I've my day job, I'm constantly getting interrupted or frozen. We can wait for the minister to return, but I'm happy to go otherwise. I think she just left to reboot, but this is part of the pandemic debates we do here. If everyone's okay to wait for her, I think it might be polite to let her rejoin before we keep going. If she can get back in, otherwise I could maybe give it a 30 seconds and then I can jump into what I have to say, or it's up to you.
I'm just trying to find her campaign manager to just call. I'm sure they're all standing there saying, what happened, what happened, what happened? So bear with me here. We'd anticipated a lot of eventualities, but we hadn't anticipated that the internet would go down. So
it's not our internet.
Yeah, we're hers.
Campaign office. Yeah.
So just bear with me. I apologize. Could be the whole building went down. She's in. We just don't.
If that's the case, I'm happy to go ahead, but it's entirely up to you either way. And I promise us Tories had nothing to do with that internet outage that happened there.
Marco, are you logging back in? All right, we'll wait for Chrystia to finish her answer there. Okay, no. Would you like Stephen to go ahead with his answer and then you can start over?
I think we should go ahead.
All right, great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, that was Chrystia. She said, please, Stephen, go ahead. I don't
All
want
right.
people-
All right. Well, look, Canada's Conservatives are 100% committed to the principle of universal health care. That's why Canada's recovery plan includes increases to provincial healthcare funding. The pandemic exposed cracks in healthcare and reminded us all of the need to strengthen it. Canada's Conservatives believe Ottawa should pay its fair share. Us Conservatives will take immediate action to restore health funding and to tackle the urgent crisis of mental health and addiction. And these are two important points. We specifically in our platform talk about addressing the opioid crisis. This is a major problem in Canada. We'll invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery community centers across the country. One of the 5 pillars of our campaign, top 5 pillars, is to build a mental health action plan. This pandemic has deepened Canada's mental health crisis, especially for our youth. We will invest heavily into mental health. This includes encouraging employers to add mental health coverage, providing $150 million over 3 years in grants to nonprofits and charities delivering mental health. I can go on quite a bit on this file. Our platform outlines it in greater detail, but we will work with the provinces to invest in mental health as the priority. It is with the goal of providing enough funding through health transfers for an additional 1 million Canadians to receive mental health treatment every year. This is a hugely important initiative, and I hope all of us can agree that mental health is a priority that Canada needs to embrace and move ahead on.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Chrystia, welcome back. I guess you better call Rogers or Bell and see what you can do about that service level you've got there. Maybe you'd like to go ahead with your response. We were on healthcare, and what's the healthcare strategy and also mental health?
Thank you so much, Michael. And I'm sorry, Michael, John, Tim, Stephen, Nicole, for that rudeness, and to everyone who is with us. I really apologize and thank you for your patience. And I think I had just, when my screen started to freeze, I had just started to say to Tim, I was sorry to hear about his dad. And that I think COVID has made us all really think a little bit more about our elders and how precious they are to us. And my own dad has gotten sick over COVID, but he's okay now, Tim. On healthcare and mental health specifically, a really important question. And I think Nicole's point that we might actually, once we can relax post-COVID, need mental health support even more is a really excellent one, Nicole. That is why in our platform, we're committed to creating a new Canada mental health transfer to support provision of mental health care across the country. That would be $4.5 billion. I also think supporting our seniors is a really essential part of this. And that's why in our platform, we commit to $9 billion to support seniors. More broadly, I think that COVID has shown us both how essential, how valuable our healthcare system is, how grateful we are to our healthcare workers, but also that it needs a little more financial support. And that's why in our platform, we commit to $25 billion over 5 years to support the healthcare system across the country, including more primary care healthcare workers.
Great, thanks very much, Chrystia. So we're kind of getting to the wrap-up stage. We've already hit 8:30, and we've certainly got a lot more questions to go, but I think we'll ask a wrap-up question, and then we'll go into your closing remarks. And this question really is whoever wins the election, you're going to be running around at a federal level. We all care about how things affect us locally. So this is really a question for each of you on what are you going to do for us? John?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you are running to become Member of Parliament for University-Rosedale. And therefore, constituency affairs and constituency concerns in the view of many people, and this question's been asked in a number of different ways over the last few days, are paramount. Of course, they're all aspirational. Everyone may want to have, at any rate, you're all aspirational. These are to be a member of Parliament of Canada is a great responsibility, but it all starts at a very granular level, which is your constituents. And how do you tell us your philosophy as it relates to constituent interaction? Let's say someone has an issue with a federally regulated company, and that company might be absolving themselves of their responsibility as it relates to whatever hypothetical issue, hypothetical matter, and it's brought to the attention of your office. Is this something that should be brought to the attention of your office? Is it something that you would want to express empathy over? Is it something that you'd want to review whatever laws are being cited or by this company, et cetera, et cetera? Would you want to direct the questions to other ministers? In other words, what is the role of a constituency office in University-Rosedale? That may sound a bit obscure, but I think it's an important question for all of us. And maybe we can start with Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I'm running because I want to make all of our lives better in University-Rosedale. And that's why I'm running for the NDP. And, I think we're all running here to be your representatives in Ottawa. And I think often in my experience and when I've had MPs, it seems more like bringing Ottawa to University-Rosedale rather than the other way around, which should be bringing University-Rosedale to Ottawa. And so I am deeply committed to listening to constituents, to working with residents associations, to bringing the stories of University-Rosedale to Ottawa.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Nicole. Tim, we're just going to go counterclockwise here.
Okay, well, thank you. And yes, I'm sure all four of us will speak to the point, make the same point that constituency work is critical. And when you're elected, you're not just elected by those that voted for your party. You're elected to listen to everybody and including those with opposing views, and to represent those. And indeed, we get the best ideas from those that oppose our views because they have insights that we may not have considered. In any case, look, I've been the party's critic for municipal affairs and transportation for a while. And as you heard in my bio, the provincial transport critic for many years. And in a city of Toronto that has the worst traffic congestion, that is handcuffed because of its lack of financial capacity, constantly having to go to other levels of government for funding, unlike big cities around the world, I would be an advocate for championing the rights of cities to have city charters that are going to give them the financial wherewithal and the decision-making powers that can do the long-range planning for affordable housing and transit that the City of Toronto is currently unable to do. I've been a champion at the local level, and in my leadership roles at the Residents Association level, I constantly reached out to other associations to develop collaborative projects and to welcome their input. And I would use the same approach if I had your confidence and was elected as your MP on September 20th.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Stephen?
Well, thanks for the question. I think it's actually a really important question. And, from my perspective, we're here to help constituents. We're here to help the members of our riding to listen, to solve problems as best we can in our particular jurisdiction. Our democracy is based on serving voters and ridings who we represent. It's the Westminster model. I think just being here, being a voice for our local community in Ottawa is how our democracy functions. And I think we need more of that in Canada. We need to serve members of our constituency. We need to just be here more often. We need to actually be in the riding, listen to our constituents, help our constituents. I think not enough MPs spend time in their constituencies helping the very people who elected them. I think what I would do, I would listen and learn as much as possible from our constituents. I think we could highlight practical programs available and communicate it through social media, through local press, local news organizations. But I think that representing and being a strong voice for Toronto and Ottawa is important. We're in the heart of Canada's largest city, the economic capital of Canada. This is a very important riding, and we need to stand up for Toronto and what's right for Toronto and Ottawa. And I would certainly be doing that.
Chrystia, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. And look, I think that here I'm going to agree with Stephen. I think that just for me personally, speaking from my own experience, it's so important and so valuable to actually live in our riding and in our community. And something that I love about Canada is my neighbors and people across the riding feel extremely, extremely able to come up to me and share their concerns, share their comments, talk about their needs. And it's actually really, really useful. I'll give you one really specific example. On my wonderful street in Summerhill, there is a really great doctor. And at the very beginning of COVID, he had some specific recommendations on PPE, and he would leave me a letter at my front door every couple of days. And when I went to UHN with the Prime Minister, I guess it was 10 days ago, one of the doctors there said, "Is so-and-so your neighbor?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, we all counted on him. He told us he lives a few doors down from you. And we're really glad that he was telling us the truth, and he really was sharing our ideas." So to me, that's an example of local democracy in action. And I'll just say one other thing as a thank you to the BIAs of University-Rosedale. I had a meeting with them in December after the fall economic statement before the budget, just to talk to them about the business supports and say, "Hey guys, how are you doing? What works for you? What doesn't?" And that was really helpful for me as we put together the budget, because it was people I know, it was restaurants I go to. Lots more to say, but I see I have to be cut off. So sorry for talking so long.
Thank you very much, Chrystia. This brings to a close the Q&A session. What we'd like to do is ask you to provide your compelling reasons why we should be voting for you. So each of you has 2 minutes to state your case. I think we mentioned earlier that the numbers had been pre-drawn. So Chrystia, I think you're up first.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. This has been a really good debate, with apologies for my technical challenges I faced. And thank you to everyone who organized it and took part, and to everyone who listened. I hope that people listening will re-elect me as your MP. And here are a few of the reasons why. I think that our government has a strong record of being there for Canadians, of being there for the people of University-Rosedale when it counts. When Donald Trump was elected and wanted to tear up NAFTA, we stood up to him and we got a good deal for Canadians. When COVID hit Canada, we were there to support businesses, to support small businesses, to support Canadians, to buy a lot of the vaccines that are getting us through this. And we're going to finish the fight against COVID. Since we formed government in 2015, we've committed $100 billion to climate action and introduced a price on pollution that is going to get the job done. And a very strong personal priority for me is our program on early learning and childcare. We committed $30 billion to that in the budget. That will deliver $10 a day childcare for all children across the country. We already have deals with 8 provinces and territories. I want your help to get the job done on early learning and childcare. This will be transformative for Canada. It will really also drive labor force participation and economic growth in our country. When it comes to our riding, I'm proud of what we've done on ravines. I'm proud of what we've done on transit, including public transit and bike lanes. I'm proud of our support for great uni-rose institutions like the University of Toronto. Thanks, everyone. I hope you'll support me on Election Day.
Thank you, Chrystia. We've got Tim next.
Thank you. And again, I echo Christia's shout out to the organizers, not only those in front of the camera at the moment, but also those behind the scenes and who put a lot of work into organizing and then dealing with the technical side of it that we've never had to deal with before. Look, I've talked about a number of issues here tonight and removing the straitjackets that cities in Canada face is obviously a big priority for Greens. I talked about guaranteed livable income. I'm really glad that the NDP has picked that up. And I think that's in this election, we've been advocating it for many. And I think what that says to me is that if that's our role as a small party at this point in time with only a few MPs and few provincial representatives, is to bring new ideas that eventually become mainstream, I'm okay with that. We haven't talked much about climate change in this particular debate. We talked a lot more in the only previous debate that we had. And I think that's unfortunate. We are the only party that has, and the last election, put forth a plan to a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2030, which is equal to our Paris obligations. And climate change is a huge economic opportunity. The green, economic recovery can create thousands, or in talking with the retrofit program, literally millions of jobs. But I think we can't, what undermines the reality of the very good promises of the three other parties that are sharing the stage here is that they also support the creation of new pipelines that are going to increase Canada's fossil fuel emissions. So the question I need to leave you with is this: how bad do the wildfires, heat waves, and flooding have to get before we stop voting for parties whose pipeline policies are going to make things worse?
Thank you, Tim. Nicole?
I am glad I get to go after Tim to say that the NDP doesn't have a pipeline policy. I don't support pipelines, and it's not in our commitments. One thing that I want to mention that I find is a bit depressing with our political system is the fact that we have a history of voting against things we don't want rather than voting for things we want. We have a history of voting against parties and people who we don't want in power. I believe that voting for the person and the party who you feel best represents you and your community is one of few things that we can do as engaged citizens. So I would encourage you tonight, when you get out and vote on September 20th, to vote for something instead of voting against something. Vote for healthcare, vote for climate action, vote for the person and the party who you think best represents your interests. I hope that will be me and the NDP. And I hope that if it's not, that you will vote and that you'll vote for your heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And last but not least, Stephen.
Last December, Ms. Freeland, you wondered aloud during an interview how to unlock the preloaded stimulus in Canadians' accumulated wealth. That is their savings and that in their homes. Since then, we have learned that the intellectual justifications for taxing home equity are being prepared. The CMHC, a government agency, recommends taxing the equity in our homes. They spent $250,000 on a report called Wealth and Generational Inequality in Canadian Housing. Is this not to scoop up what you perhaps see as some of that unearned and undeserved wealth that Canadians rely on to fund their retirement? Mr. Trudeau says not, but it's there in your platform. Yes, you call it an anti-flipping tax. Sure, that's how it starts, the old bait and switch. And in any case, If you wish to review a list of other promises Mr. Trudeau has broken, we can happily do so. Indeed, since 2016, the Liberal government you represent has required Canadians, for no obvious reason, to disclose the sale of a family's principal residence. It must be a lot of money, a tempting number. And now Liberal candidates are saying Justin Trudeau will tax our homes if re-elected because that's what we have to do. And yet your party position continues to be that you don't intend to tax home equity. Madame, with the greatest of respect, nobody can believe the Liberals anymore. My name is Stephen Taylor, and I want to be your next member of Parliament. Thank you very much.
There we go. All right, Stephen, thank you very much for your final remarks, and thanks to all of the candidates for the wrap up. I guess it's for everybody on the phone now to determine who they want to vote for. As I say, vote early and vote often. So first thing I'd like to do is just thank the candidates for their time this evening. We really appreciate it. I know it was last minute, but I think it came together well. And also for the audience, just to give you some perspective, we've had a peak of around 262 people and an average somewhere between 160 and 200 on this particular call. So good representation across the resident associations. Just in terms of voting, we're supposed to vote on September the 20th. I've already voted. It's an important election, so I think it's important for everybody to vote. So especially those young people. I would also just remind everybody that these kinds of events are put on by, paid for, and volunteered by your resident associations. And if you're not a member, I would encourage you to join any one of the 7 resident associations because we all get paid the same amount of money to do this job. And the only way we get money to do this is if you join. So we are working hard as your neighbors to support your interests, and it's a great way for everybody to become aware of what's going on. So we'll just wrap up to say...
To be clear, Michael means we all get paid.
Zero,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, there's no special accommodation for who spends more time.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody. I guess I can't say have a safe drive home. Maybe it's a safe walk downstairs to have your final cocktail for the evening or dinner. And we wish all the candidates well in the election, including the 2 that weren't able to join us tonight. And good luck. Thanks again.